Listen carefully, because I'm about to reveal 7 signs that most men completely miss. Signs that your woman is not satisfied in bed. These are subtle, but once you know them, you'll never see her the same way again. Relationships are complex ecosystems of emotional, physical, and psychological connection. When intimacy begins to wane, partners often communicate their feelings through subtle behavioral changes rather than direct conversation. Understanding these patterns can help couples address issues before they become insurmountable barriers to connection. The signs we'll explore aren't about blame or judgment, they're about recognition and understanding. When we learn to read these communication patterns, we create opportunities for deeper connection and more fulfilling relationships. Before I blow your mind, please hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this truth travels. Before exploring specific signs, it's important to understand what fulfilling intimacy looks like. Healthy, intimate relationships involve emotional safety, physical compatibility, open communication, and mutual satisfaction. When these elements are present, partners typically feel valued, desired, and emotionally connected. However, when intimacy becomes routine, one-sided, or emotionally disconnected, partners often unconsciously begin to communicate their dissatisfaction through behavioral changes. These aren't manipulative tactics, they're natural protective responses to unmet needs. Sign 1. Changes in physical initiation patterns. One of the most telling indicators of intimacy satisfaction is how often a partner initiates physical connection. In healthy relationships, both partners typically feel comfortable initiating intimate moments, whether that's spontaneous affection, romantic gestures, or sexual intimacy. When someone begins to feel disconnected or unfulfilled, they often stop initiating physical contact altogether. This isn't necessarily conscious, it's often a protective mechanism. If previous attempts at connection haven't been satisfying or reciprocated in meaningful ways, the natural response is to stop reaching out. The pattern might look like this: someone who used to surprise their partner with passionate kisses, playful touches throughout the day, or romantic advances in the evening gradually becomes more passive. They wait for their partner to make the first move, and even then, their response might feel less enthusiastic than before. This change often reflects a deeper emotional shift. When we feel truly satisfied and connected, we naturally want to create more of those positive experiences. When intimacy becomes predictable or one-sided, the motivation to initiate decreases because the anticipated outcome doesn't feel rewarding enough to justify the emotional vulnerability required. Sign 2. Increased avoidance through legitimate excuses. Everyone experiences genuine fatigue, stress, and busy periods. However, when these excuses consistently emerge specifically around intimate moments, while energy remains available for other activities, it often signals something deeper than simple tiredness. The pattern typically involves selective availability. The same person who claims to be too exhausted for intimacy might have energy for social media, television, or conversations with friends. They might be genuinely busy with work, but somehow find time for hobbies or activities that don't involve their partner. This selective avoidance often stems from anticipatory disappointment. If intimate experiences have become routine, rushed, or focused primarily on one partner's satisfaction, the other partner might unconsciously begin to avoid these situations. The excuses aren't necessarily dishonest. The person might genuinely feel tired when thinking about unfulfilling intimacy. Understanding this pattern requires recognizing that emotional energy and physical energy are different resources. Someone might have physical energy for individual activities, but lack the emotional energy required for vulnerable, intimate connection, especially if those experiences haven't been fulfilling recently. Sign 3. Physical presence without emotional engagement. Physical participation in intimate moments doesn't guarantee emotional or psychological engagement. When someone feels disconnected or unfulfilled, they might maintain the mechanics of intimacy while emotionally withdrawing. This disconnection manifests through subtle body language changes. Previously expressive partners might become more passive or mechanical in their movements. Someone who used to be actively engaged might now seem to be going through the motions, present physically but absent emotionally. The difference is often palpable. Engaged partners move with spontaneity, respond naturally to touch, and maintain an active role in the experience. Disconnected partners might participate but feel more like they're completing a task rather than sharing an experience. This emotional withdrawal usually isn't intentional or malicious. It's often a protective response when intimate experiences have become predictable, one-sided, or emotionally unfulfilling. The mind naturally disengages from experiences that don't provide satisfaction or connection. Recognizing this pattern requires paying attention to energy and enthusiasm rather than just participation. True intimacy involves mutual engagement, spontaneous responses, and emotional presence, not just physical compliance. Sign 4. Avoiding eye contact during intimate moments. Eye contact during intimacy serves as a bridge between physical and emotional connection. When partners maintain eye contact, they're sharing vulnerability, creating emotional intimacy, and staying present with each other rather than retreating into private fantasies or mental distractions. When someone begins to consistently avoid eye contact during intimate moments, it often indicates emotional disconnection. They might be physically present but mentally elsewhere, perhaps fantasizing about different scenarios, thinking about unrelated topics, or simply trying to get through the experience. This avoidance isn't necessarily conscious or intentional. Many people don't realize they've stopped making eye contact until it's pointed out. However, the absence of this connection often reflects a deeper issue. The experience isn't engaging enough to keep them emotionally present. Eye contact requires vulnerability and presence. When intimate experiences become routine or unsatisfying, maintaining that level of emotional openness can feel unnecessary or even uncomfortable. The person might unconsciously protect themselves by avoiding the deep connection that eye contact represents. Partners who feel truly satisfied and connected tend to naturally maintain eye contact because they're fully engaged in the shared experience. They want to connect on all levels: physical, emotional, and psychological. Sign 5. Quick emotional and physical disconnection afterward. The moments immediately following intimate connection often reveal a lot about overall satisfaction and emotional fulfillment. Partners who feel truly satisfied tend to linger, maintain physical closeness, and enjoy the emotional afterglow of connection. However, when someone feels unfulfilled or disconnected, they often quickly return to individual activities. This might involve immediately reaching for a phone, getting dressed quickly, turning away to sleep, or starting conversations about unrelated topics. This rapid disconnection serves multiple purposes. It might be a way to avoid the emotional vulnerability that comes with post-intimate closeness, or it could be an unconscious attempt to signal dissatisfaction without direct confrontation. Fulfilled partners typically enjoy the complete experience, not just the physical aspect, but also the emotional connection, the shared vulnerability, and the sense of closeness that follows. When this desire for continued connection is absent, it often indicates that the experience wasn't emotionally or physically satisfying enough to create a desire for extended intimacy. The contrast is usually noticeable. Someone who used to enjoy cuddling, talking, or simply being close afterward might begin to immediately shift their attention elsewhere, creating emotional distance even while physically present. Sign 6. Defensive or dismissive communication about intimacy. Communication patterns around intimate topics often reflect overall satisfaction levels. Partners who feel fulfilled typically feel comfortable discussing their intimate relationship, sharing preferences, and working together to maintain connection. However, when someone feels unsatisfied or disconnected, conversations about intimacy often become uncomfortable. They might respond with generic phrases like, everything's fine, become defensive when questions are asked, or dismiss concerns with statements like, it's not a big deal. This communication pattern serves as protection against several potential outcomes. The person might be avoiding hurt feelings, both their own and their partner's. They might fear that honest communication could lead to conflict, or might feel hopeless about the possibility of improvement. Sometimes the defensiveness stems from not knowing how to articulate what's missing. It's easier to say everything's fine than to explain complex feelings about emotional disconnection, routine intimacy, or unmet needs. The absence of open communication about intimate topics often creates a cycle where problems persist because they're never directly addressed. Partners might sense something is different, but lack the information needed to understand or improve the situation. Sign 7. Increased attention to external validation. When intimate relationships don't provide adequate emotional and physical fulfillment, people sometimes unconsciously seek validation elsewhere. This doesn't necessarily mean infidelity. It might simply mean increased attention to appearance, social media engagement, or interactions with others. The pattern might include taking more selfies, spending additional time on grooming or appearance, becoming more social, or showing increased interest in attention from others. While these behaviors have many possible explanations, in the context of other signs, they might indicate unmet needs for appreciation, desire, or excitement. This external focus often stems from natural human needs for validation and appreciation. When these needs aren't being met within the primary relationship, people sometimes unconsciously seek them elsewhere, not necessarily romantically, but simply as a way to feel attractive, interesting, or valued. Understanding this pattern requires recognizing that everyone needs to feel desired and appreciated. When intimate relationships become routine or one-sided, partners might seek evidence of their desirability through increased attention to how others perceive them. This shift doesn't necessarily indicate intentions of infidelity or relationship problems beyond intimacy issues. It might simply reflect normal human needs for validation that aren't currently being met within the relationship. The psychology behind these communication patterns. These behavioral changes aren't random. They represent adaptive responses to unmet emotional and physical needs. Understanding the psychology behind these patterns helps partners respond with empathy rather than defensiveness or anger. When intimate needs aren't being met, people often unconsciously protect themselves through gradual emotional withdrawal. This protection serves several purposes. It reduces vulnerability to disappointment, minimizes the emotional investment in potentially unsatisfying experiences, and creates psychological distance from situations that haven't been fulfilling. These responses aren't typically conscious decisions. Most people don't wake up and decide to emotionally withdraw from their partner. Instead, these changes happen gradually as the mind naturally adapts to repeated experiences of disconnection or dissatisfaction. The protective mechanisms develop because emotional vulnerability requires trust that the experience will be worthwhile. When intimate experiences consistently fail to provide satisfaction, connection, or fulfillment, the natural response is to reduce emotional investment as a form of self-protection. Understanding this psychological foundation is crucial because it shifts the focus from blame to collaboration. These behaviors aren't attacks on the relationship. They're attempts to cope with unmet needs while maintaining the overall partnership. Creating positive change through understanding. Recognizing these patterns creates opportunities for deeper connection rather than reasons for conflict. When partners understand that these behaviors often represent unmet needs rather than relationship problems, they can work together toward solutions. The first step involves creating safe spaces for honest communication. This means approaching conversations with curiosity rather than defensiveness, focusing on understanding rather than being right, and recognizing that both partners likely have valid perspectives and unmet needs. Effective communication about intimacy requires vulnerability from both partners. This might involve sharing fantasies, discussing preferences, acknowledging areas of dissatisfaction, and working together to create experiences that fulfill both partners' needs for connection, satisfaction, and emotional intimacy. Creating positive change also requires recognizing that intimacy involves multiple dimensions: emotional, physical, psychological, and relational. Addressing only physical aspects while ignoring emotional connection rarely creates lasting satisfaction for either partner. The goal isn't to eliminate all relationship challenges, but to create patterns of communication and connection that allow both partners to feel valued, satisfied, and emotionally connected. This requires ongoing effort, honest communication, and willingness to prioritize the relationship's intimate aspects. Building stronger intimate connections. Understanding these communication patterns provides a foundation for building stronger, intimate connections. Rather than viewing these signs as problems to solve, partners can use them as information about areas that need attention and care. Creating fulfilling intimate relationships requires ongoing attention to both emotional and physical connection. This might involve scheduling regular relationship conversations, prioritizing intimacy despite busy schedules, exploring new ways to connect physically and emotionally, and maintaining curiosity about each other's evolving needs and preferences. The most important element is often simple presence, being emotionally and physically available during intimate moments, paying attention to your partner's responses and needs, and maintaining the vulnerability and openness that creates deep connection. Remember that these patterns develop gradually and typically require time and consistent effort to change. The goal isn't perfection, but rather ongoing improvement in communication, connection, and mutual satisfaction. When both partners commit to understanding each other's needs and working together to create fulfilling intimate experiences, these communication patterns often naturally resolve as the underlying needs are addressed through improved connection and satisfaction. Now tell me in the comments, did you recognize any of these patterns? What city are you watching from? Let's support each other in the comments below.